broadcasting across the United States. Now here's the president of the Christian Research Institute, Hanegraaff.
And thank you so much, Randy. I love what you said in the introduction. One of our core values is to teach people how to read the Bible for all its substantial worth. And of course, when you read through the Bible, so often you run into questions that are, well, they're difficult to answer. And so I thought I'd start a series in which we answered questions as we read through the biblical text. And I wanted to start with the most important book in the New Testament, only because it's the first book of the New Testament. And it is the first of the Gospels. It is the Gospel of Matthew. And on the last broadcast, I was talking about sort of an overview of the Gospel of Matthew. And then we started in on the Gospel by reading its first chapter. But as you go through the first chapter, you realize that a lot of questions arise. For example, why organize the genealogy of Jesus, as Matthew does, into three groups of 14? 14, 14, 14. 42 names are given to us. But why?
Are Christians guilty of blind faith? Read Hank Hanegraaff's book, Has God Spoken? Click on the eye above.
The answer to that question is it's the numerical equivalent of the Hebrew letters in King David's name, and it highlights the most significant names in the lineage of Jesus Christ. And that's exactly what the text says. It's the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And later on we read, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, from David until the captivity in Babylon are 14 generations, and from the captivity in Babylon until the Christ are 14 generations. So what Matthew is doing is he's artistically emphasizing Jesus as Messiah who forever sits upon the throne of David. And what Matthew is doing is not unique in biblical history. If we go all the way back to the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, we see Moses, the author. He skillfully organized the royal genealogy, the genealogy from which Jesus Christ emerged, into two symmetrical groups. You might recall that there are 10 generations before the flood and 10 generations after the flood. Now, immediately you have to recognize that this doesn't mean that there were only 20 generations. What it means is there's a theological purpose in the arrangement. And so there's ample precedent for seeing the genealogies as symmetrical rather than sequential. Not all the generations are accounted for. And let me elaborate on that for just a moment, because there are many people who look at what Moses did with the genealogies, and they immediately say, we can tell you how old the universe is. The universe is about 6,000 years old. Well, the mistake that they're making is that the genealogies are not there to give us a chronology. Rather, this is chirological. What that means is the genealogies are there to show God's purposes in creation, not to give us some kind of chronology that tells us how old the universe is. Because if you want that kind of answer to your question, you have to look at God's other revelation, which is the universe itself. And that's why King David says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they proclaim knowledge. There's no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their words go out to the ends of the earth. So let me do a little bit more of a deep dive on that. You have Matthew listing Jehoram as the father of Uzziah. That's in verse 8.
Become equipped to exercise truth and experience life. Subscribe to the Christian Research Journal at equip.org or by clicking on the I above.
And when you read that, you immediately ought to recognize something. Matthew bypasses at least 3 generations. The generation of Ahaziah, Josiah, or I should say Joash, and Amaziah. Sometimes I get these names mixed up in my mind. But rather than being the father of Uzziah, Joram fathered the line that culminated in Uzziah. So while biblical genealogies do not provide a precise chronology, they are rife with theological significance. There's another question that I want to address from chapter 1, a question that I've been asked from time to time on the Bible Answer Man broadcast, and that is, why include women in the genealogy? Because if you read most genealogies, particularly genealogies in that particular epoch of time, you won't find women, you'll only find men. But in this genealogy, as we read through it yesterday, you find women. You find Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba. Remember Bathsheba, the woman with whom David committed adultery, and the woman that bore him a child, the child named Solomon. So why include women? Well, this underscores the role of women in God's redemptive plans. It anticipates something even more significant, because the quintessential woman in the plan of God is Theotokos, the mother of God. She is the last Eve, just as Christ is the last Adam. And this is not Christotokos, the bearer of Christ, a man in whom God dwelled as if in a temple, but as affirmed by the Third Ecumenical Council, Ephesus, 431. Theotokos is the bearer of God. Imagine that. If Christ were not truly the God-man, we could not become gods by grace, gods in life and nature, but not in the Godhead. What should our disposition therefore be towards Mary? Should we say, as I have said many times on the Bible Answer Man broadcast in response to questions, well, she was a sinner. She was a sinner just like all the rest of us are sinners. Well, it is true that Mary was broken in the sense of having a broken gene, just like the rest of us. But she was the quintessential woman of all of human history. And therefore, she's not to be worshipped, but she is most certainly to be reverenced.